Here we are. It's the second Thursday of the month. You know what that means? That means it's time for our live Q&A. Seems like I always end up in a weather report. I'm looking out the window. Here in Wisconsin, I believe I said this the last time we were live, it has been unseasonably warm. 65 the last few days. It's a little bit cooler today, but man, our snow is long gone. And last winter, I can tell you, we got 96 inches of snow over the course of the winter. This year, I think we got 5, 6. I think I only ran the snowblower twice, which with the parking lot I have here at the shop, that is a welcome problem to have. So a couple things. One, we create sawdust in our shops, right? That's a good thing because it means we're working. And a good question is, what do we do with that sawdust? You do have to be a little bit careful. I know a lot of people like to compost with their sawdust. You got to be careful about that depending on what is in there. Keep in mind, man-made materials have a lot of stuff added to them. You know, MDF and plywood dust that's full of glue as well as dust. Walnut can be an issue if you're composting. Anyway, to help you with this whole thing of what to do with sawdust, we put a guide together a while back about how to upcycle, make good use of your sawdust. So you can grab that PDF, and that's available as a download for you. And then the other thing, I'm going to mention this every time I'm not live between now and August 25th. On the Thursday live, or April 25th, on the Thursday live in April, Rob Johnstone, formerly with Woodworkers Journal, is going to be here in the shop with me. It's going to be a really good live stream. Rob is way more of a hand tool geek, and I mean that in the nicest way, than I am. So he's got another whole level of expertise that I don't have. And then additionally, you may not know this, but Rob went to school to be a luthier, to be an instrument maker. So that's given his woodworking another whole bend. He's also like me. He's an avid guitar player. Maybe I'll talk him into bringing his guitar, and we will burn your ears with some music at the end of that live stream. But anyway, note that the live in April is not the second Thursday like it normally is. It's going to be later in the month. So watch your email, keep your ear to the ground on that stuff, and just pay attention to that. It's going to be a very good live stream. Rob is very fun. So before I jump on questions, I wanted to do just a little show and tell. And I don't know that I've shown you this before, but I was using this plane today, which I did not put in the right spot. There it is. This is my Lee Nielsen block plane. And when I was using it today, it just reminded me of, you know, sometimes you get a tool that is it's just a pleasure to use for a bunch of reasons. This tool already had that going for it. What I did here, it did not come with that engraving. I had that engraving added, and there's a blog about this on WWGOA.com. If you just search on the site engraving, you're going to find this. But a good friend of mine, Jenny Bauer, she does this engraving, and watching her do the work is absolutely incredible. She did my block plane. She also did a Leatherman for me. And she's carving metal like people carve wood, and doing it all by hand. So it was a really nice embellishment. Once I had this for a while and I realized just how much I love this tool, I had the work done. I had the carving done, and I'm happy with that. I love it. It made a tool I was already really, really happy with, made me even happier with it. I love the way it's personalized. And I feel like this is now, that plane is now one of these things that, like, I don't know, in years to come, somebody's going to find that somewhere and get it. You know, they're going to be like, boy, somebody must have really loved that tool, and they had that work done. They had that embellishment added to it. And that's true. So anyway, I wanted to point that out. If you're interested in getting similar work done to something you own, again, her name is Jenny Bauer. She lives in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. You can send her stuff. She can engrave it for you. If you find that article, if you look up that article on WWGOA, it's in the blog section of GOA.com, WWGOA.com. Her contact information is there, and you can contact her. And I'm not trying to do an ad for Jenny. I'm just saying that this was a really neat thing that I added to this block plane I love. And it's a really neat thing I added to the Leatherman that I have with me anytime I'm on the motorcycle, anytime I'm camping, really like anytime I'm doing outdoor stuff, that Leatherman is with me. And that's why I had her carve that as well. It's just a really nice touch to add to something that's special to you. Or, if you're going to gift something to someone, what a nice way to take that gift to another level as well. Okay. Get my iPad open. See what we got here. Mike says he's considering either buying or making a box joint jig. Is it better to make or buy for a table saw or a router, or one that works on both? So for me, and I think this is going to be like it's kind of going to be like a statistic of one kind of an answer. I prefer to do box joints, finger joints on the table saw. And there's no right or wrong to this. I've also done it on the router table. I've actually got Rockler's box joint jig for the router table. I've used quite a bit. But I think that there are a couple factors here. With the dado head on a table saw, the cutting, the rotary motion is toward you, and you're pushing the work into it. On a box joint jig on a router table, of course, the rotary motion of the router bit is this way, and you're pushing your work into it. So the jig has to be a little bit different. I mean, no matter what, you want it to be a good solid jig, but with that horizontal rotary motion on a router table, you really got to make sure everything is rock solid so that it doesn't have a tendency to grab and shift your work as you're making a cut. I also find that I've got a good quality dado. I've got a Freud dado I use on the table saw. Cut quality is great. I think it's faster to make those cuts with a dado head than it is with a router bit. And I think especially when you get to, maybe not 1/4 inch fingers in your box joint or finger joint, but 3/8, 1/2 inch, bigger sizes, you're gonna babysit that cut a little bit more going over a router bit than you are going over a dado head. You're gonna take it easier. And again, especially if finger joints in thin stock, 1/4 inch stock, are easy. Your cutter is only a 1/4 inch high. It's the thickness of the material. When you get to thicker material, 3/4 inch hardwood, that means your depth of cut is 3/4 of an inch. You need to do this in one pass. So again, I just find it easier to execute that with a dado head on a table saw than with a router bit on a router table. So I guess if I was helping somebody make a buying decision, I would say if you own a dado head, just set it up to do on a table saw. I don't see a compelling reason to toggle back and forth. Like for this application, I'm going to do this on the table saw. This application, I'm going to do this on the router table. I think once you commit with the jig, you can just be committed and stick with whatever that approach is. I also think that I'm trying to think on the router table. I'm not sure that that a jig would talk to both devices. You know what I mean? Like for a table saw, it's basically kind of a beefed up miter gauge. For a router table, it's a little bit different setup. So I'm not sure you'd get one jig that would go back and forth between the two. So for me, and I don't use, finger joints are not a huge part of my joinery. I use them and I know how to use the jig. But for me and my application with finger joints, I would just stick with a dado head on the table saw. Paul says, I'm using Total Boat to fill cracks on a live edge slab. Some of the cracks extend through the edge of the slab. I've seen how you recommend preparing wood with Tyvek tape to seal the bottom of the cracks. How do you seal the crack off on an irregular edge or side of a live edge slab? I have a straight edge. I am assuming this next question is part of this. I have a straight edge on a portion of my live edge slab. I'd like to contour that by hand so it blends with the rest. How do you recommend I accomplish this? Okay. Probably the same slab. Another question. So let's do the first one first. So let me see if I've got something here. This will kind of work for us. So while this is laying here, we can play name that material, which of course is a question that comes into Paul and I for when we answer WWGOA questions. Probably the most common one is a picture of something. What wood is this? So I mean, I'll talk about this as it relates to the cracks and epoxy a little bit, and then I'll come back and tell you what wood it is. But extra points if you know. So in something like this, where it is so rampant with cracks, if you were going to turn this into a writing surface, it would not be a very good writing surface because of the cracks. So we've got a couple things going on here. This particular crack is end and end, but it goes through. So when we look at the other side of this, whoop, right there, you can see that crack goes all the way through. So what Paul referenced there is using Tyvek tape. So let me just grab that for a visual. I'm coming back. I'm still coming back. Of course, it's at the extreme other end of the shop where all my epoxy stuff is. Tyvek tape. So Tyvek is house wrap. And when you put a window in Tyvek, you tape it off. You kind of gasket it with tape. This is a great product to create small scale dams over cracks. So if we're going to fill this and we want to make sure that expensive epoxy isn't pouring out the other side, then putting Tyvek tape over the cracks is a great way to go. Boy, is that camera crooked, huh? Is a great way to go so that your epoxy doesn't end up just all over the floor. On an end, just putting Tyvek tape here to prevent epoxy here from blowing out may or may not be effective. So in that case, I would be more likely to build a dam like this, and you can use silicone caulk to fasten this temporarily to the end grain. The other benefit to Tyvek tape is that epoxy doesn't stick to it. If you're going to make a dam out of a chunk of wood, then you want to put Tyvek tape on here, then silicone caulk, then this, so that when the epoxy comes out and ends up out here, you're not just gluing this dam to the end of your board. On an irregular edge, so we kind of got that going here. There's a crack. There's an irregular edge there. I've had good luck, even when it's a little bit irregular like this, using Tyvek tape there in order for that to seal that up. The other way that you can do that is you can go back to the dam idea, and you can use silicone caulk as a gasket, and then let me grab a chunk. So even though that edge is irregular, we could make a dam out of a piece like this, cut that off, Tyvek tape this, use the silicone caulk to get that to adhere. And again, because caulk is thick, it acts like a gasket. We could basically gasket this small piece of wood against that irregular edge, let that cure, do the epoxy work. What that means is some of the epoxy is going to end up past here. So once it's cured, you're going to have to sand that back to go to the edge here, to ease the epoxy back to that edge, which kind of leads us to the next question of getting a straight edge to look like a not straight edge. Tyvek tape wherever you can. And then where tape won't work, making a dam with Tyvek tape and silicone caulk is a good solution for that. So then let me read that first question again, or second question again. All right, then the other part of that is want to contour it by hand so it blends with the rest of the slab. So somewhere on his slab, he's got a straight edge. He wants to make it look like a live edge. So a couple different ways you can pull this off. A tool that I've shown a few times that I like a lot for this is called the thing that I just dropped. Is called the Restorer. So that's this. So what's cool about this is, you know, it kind of looks like a planer, like a handheld electric planer, but it's not. What's cool about it is that you can swap the heads. The head that's in there right now is a flutter sander. It's flexible. I can take that out. Easy changes, so that can come out. I could put in just a conventional sanding drum. I could put in a wire wheel. So with this, I'd probably start with this. I'd probably start with the drum. And then using it just like this, what's nice is you can put dust collection on here and it's very effective. You can pull this along the edge just freehand. And you can shape and contour that in order to get what you want. I would do this with, you know, probably an 80 grit, pretty rough, get the edge going. As you progress, then eventually I would switch back to this flutter sander that was in there when I started, because that's gonna, a flutter sander kind of wraps around the edge. So when you press this against the edge of the material, it's gonna conform so you don't, unlike that one that's in there now, which is rigid, it's gonna allow you to ease it a little bit so it looks more like a natural live edge. And then with bark and stuff in general, then I may be using the wire wheel on those in order to clean up bark or clean up the edge. So to here, as you're forming that new live edge look, you could go to the wire wheel to give it some texture to match whatever else is going on. So that's a way to do it. You could simply put 60 or 80 grit paper in on a sanding disc, in an angle grinder, something like that, and then just kind of freehand flow over that. Big problem with that is you don't have dust collection and it's going to make a huge mess. So part of the reason I really like this tool is the interchangeable heads and the dust collection, but using an angle grinder freestyle would also let you shape that edge. Kenny says, how can I set my angle in degrees to hone my plane blades in a honing guide? So typically, if this is what you're talking about, there's a lot of leaving the camera today. I think I have one here. So if this is what you're talking about, let me grab a chisel. With a honing guide, the way it works when everything is set correctly is that this is going to close against a chisel or a plane iron like this, so that when you're on a whetstone, there's a roller bearing right there. So when you're on a whetstone and you're doing this, this is establishing the exact angle on that bevel. This is way too steep. It'd be more like this. So that's establishing the angle on that bevel for you. With this particular one, it says right on the side to get an angle of whatever, X, to get an angle of 25 degrees, allow this to project out such a certain distance, 1.25 inches or whatever it is. So what you need to know is the geometry for your honing guide of, if you start with a chisel that's got a bevel on it, which it will, get the chisel in the guide, eyeball that to where the bevel is flat on your stone, and you're going to have to fuss with it a little bit. Once the bevel is flat on the stone, measure the distance from the edge of the guide to the cutting tip of the chisel. And that number will always be the same. So whether it's a chisel or a plane iron, it's the same concept. Once you know it, what some people will do is make a block so that, like, if I've got a block set, oh, maybe I can use this. If I've got layout on this block, I could put the honing guide up against it, project the chisel out just the right amount, lock that in place. So in other words, there are marks on here showing me how far to let that chisel stick out. So that, to get that consistent, that's what you need to do. And you want to do that. You want to, you don't want to take the chance that each time you hone the chisels, you're putting a slightly different angle on it. So you've got to master that projection, how far the chisel or the plane iron goes past the honing guide, the edge of the honing guide. Jason says, did you make any of the bows in the background, and would you do a video on bow making? I did. Let's see. So I made this one. But I'm going to also show you this one. So, in I think 2016, I know I dated it. Oh, 2011, I made this one. So a friend of mine, Tom Turgeon, teaches classes starting with a stave. It's yellow heart and bamboo. So starting with a stave, making the bow. In the world of woodworking, it's one of the coolest things I have ever done. One of the things I really liked about Tom's approach is he kept saying, you have to teach the wood to bend. Because of course a stick doesn't want to flex, it doesn't want to become a bow. So there's a bunch involved with that. It's shaping it, and then it's gradually once it's shaped, you do not want to just grab that bowstring and pull it back to 28 inches in my case, because that's going to adversely affect the limbs. So there's just so much cool stuff going on. And then with wood choice, there are very specific reasons why it's bamboo on the outer face, yellow heart on the inner face. Once it's close to being done, you do the process which is called tillering. So you draw the bow and you see how the lower limb and the upper limb react to the draw, and then you do work on one or the other in order to get what you want. So the whole process was very cool. We did make a video out of this. I don't know that it's streaming on WWGOA or not. But Tom and I shot this whole process. And I know there was a DVD, and over time, the company that owns GOA is taking all the DVDs and turning them into streaming. Whether they've done that with the bow making or not, I don't know. I brought the other one out because, this came out okay, and it's about a 45-pound draw weight. Then Tom made for me this one. The draw weight on this is a little bit higher. It's a different shape. It's what's called a reflex deflex. So there's some benefits to that. So he made this one for me as a gift, and I used this one for a bunch of years until I got the bow that I shoot now. The bow I shoot today is one I had made for me by a Boyer in Michigan. So yeah, it's very cool stuff. I'm very into traditional archery, instinctive shooting. So that was a very neat journey that got me away. I'll see who I can torque off here. It got me away from using training wheels, which is referencing compound bows. So I belong to an archery club, and there are plenty of compound bow shooters there, and they take it very tongue-in-cheek when I reference compound bows as having training wheels. You got to get my sense of humor. Or not, I guess. Miter saw safety from Dennis. What's the rule for how short does a piece of lumber be before you use some type of holder? What are some of the best ones to look at? So you can use a holder on any piece. It doesn't have to be short. I mean, I would say anything that's under 8 inches-ish, a holder would be a good idea. And then best ones to look at. I don't know that these are commercially made. Like here in my classes, and then also when I teach at the Mark Adams School, we basically just have it's pretty simple. It's a piece with a little bit of a rabbet in the end of it. And you're using this, if my short stock is against the miter saw fence, you're using this rabbeted piece in place of your hand to hold that material down and against the fence. So it's the concept is a little bit like a push stick on a table saw. It's made a little bit differently, but it's a similar idea. So if anything is if you're using a miter saw and your spidey senses are going off, you should be using a hold down. This is a question I don't understand. Dances with aardvarks, graver, carved, or CNC? I don't know what that references. Henry says, I like your new bench tops. Thank you. It was a long and winding road to get to these. My friend Charlie dried this ash in his kiln. That was one of the first, some of the first wood he processed through his kiln. So I started out with about 30-inch wide slabs that I cut into 3-inch rips that I then glued back into the slabs you're looking at here. but they really came out great. They're nice and flat. He did a great job drying it. So the material is really, really consistent on moisture content. So they're staying flat. They look cool. And Dave says he's building some large locker doors. Lisa says, never heard of that. Pretty cool little tool. So I don't know if she's referencing maybe the Restorer or the block plane from earlier. Either one. They're both cool tools. All right, Alec, this is a 2-bit question. Sounds like my sense of humor. Hashtag dad jokes. I'm interested in trying out casting resin turning blanks. When would you recommend investing in a pressure pot instead of just sealing with penetrating epoxy before casting the wood? Second bit, I'm having some difficulty with my twice turn bowls. Okay, so let's do the first part first. So with making stuff out of epoxy, what we're talking about here, let me grab an example. So this one is nearly done, epoxy and wood mix. And this was cast in a form, epoxy poured over the wood, and then the turning was done. So the deal with a pressure pot is one of the byproducts of doing all of this can be that you end up with bubbles in the epoxy. So then when you're done and you're looking at this, you can see those bubbles. With a pressure pot, you're literally changing the atmospheric pressure internally in the pot to eliminate those bubbles. The other way you can do it is with a vacuum pot. So I choose to use a pressure pot in part because of my teaching, the video work, and everything else. And the reason there is I think everybody owns an air compressor. Almost everybody owns an air compressor. Not everybody owns a vacuum pump. To use a vacuum pot, you got to have a vacuum pump. Vacuum pumps are expensive. Pressure pot, you just need an air compressor. So I went to a pressure pot very early in my casting. So I think Alec is saying, when would you recommend investing in a pressure pot? So I went the pressure pot route early because I didn't want to have bubbles in the casting. Like epoxy is expensive. So relative to the cost of a pressure pot, which I bought on Amazon, that's a low cost investment to make sure that the epoxy I'm using is going to come out nice. So like I said, I did it very, very early, and now anything I cast goes in the pressure pot. So it's really just, it's not an epoxy specific thing. The pot I have is actually just, it was designed to be used for painting. Then you would fill it with paint, pressurize it, and then spray paint. You could attach a spray gun to it and spray paint. So it's a repurposing of a thing. And I have a 2.5 gallon, and one of these days I'm going to go bigger. The diameter of that 2.5 gallon, this is about the biggest diameter you could put inside it. I think it's 9 inches across or so. Someday I'm going to go to a bigger pot so I can put bigger diameter stuff in it. And then I'm having some difficulty with twice turned bowls. Not sure if I'm getting them centered correctly or if I'm not leaving them thick enough before drying, but I end up blasting through the side. I put the word blasting in there because I've done that, and that's kind of what happens. So as a general rule, you want 10% wall thickness, meaning if this is 10 inches across, meaning if this is 10 inches across, turning it green is what we're talking about here. You would turn it and leave a 1-inch wall. If it's 20 inches across, you'd leave a 2-inch wall throughout, side and bottom. And then what happens is you set that aside, it dries, it goes a little bit egg-shaped or a lot egg-shaped. And then when it goes back on the lathe with that 10% wall left, you've got enough material there to round it out. It's something my friend Paul has taught me, that when I turn green wood, I turn it start to finish. I start with a green bowl, I turn it, I sand it, I seal it, done. Paul does what Alec does, which is turn them green, dry them, remount it, finish it. There are a lot of advantages to that over what I do. I'm just too impatient to wait months for the blank to dry. Try that 10% rule and see how that does for you. Craig says no one was a more intuitive hunter than Fred Bear, and he occasionally used compound bows. Yet intuitive or instinctive shooting and traditional archery are two different things. But you were talking about having tools customized with engraving or carving. When I came in, I wonder if it was real engraving or training wheel engraving. From what I've seen Jenny do, she takes this, and it's on a spinny thing, some kind of lazy Susan device, and she's got a chisel, and she is carving and turning this. Carving and turning, carving and turning. I don't know, it makes some sense to me with like brass. I don't know when she does something that's a harder steel, what the tool is. But as far as I know, it's nothing, I don't know what training wheel means for you, for the question. It's nothing motorized or powered. It's, as far as I've seen, she's doing everything by hand. John says, many years ago, I shot third place in state championships. That's cool. I shot straight bow hunter using a 50-pound Bear Grizzly. Nice. The guys who won first and second were using compounds. Oh, so somebody brought a knife to a gunfight, or like, I'm surprised they didn't have you categorized traditional versus compound. On a 45-yard target, my big fiberglass arrows, they call them telephone poles, destroyed one of my opponent's aluminum knitting needles. Yeah, the whole archery, it's a friendly rivalry of traditional versus compound. And Krista and I are in an archery club. We're one of the few traditional shooters. She also shoots traditional. We're one of the few traditional shooters there. Almost everybody is compound bows and range finders and the whole deal, which is cool. Like the way that technology has advanced, where they can shoot a compound bow 60 yards more, 80 yards, and accurately hit a target. That's pretty incredible stuff. That's pretty amazing body mechanics that you can lock in and make that shot. So the whole thing is, archery in general is a pretty cool sport. All right. Well, we're at 4:40. No more preguntas, no more questions. I'm gonna chat a little bit about stuff, and then we'll see what happens. So again, helping you deal with the sawdust in your shop and what to do with it. We have got a PDF you can download with some ideas for you about upcycling your sawdust. So different ways you can deal with that sawdust and get some use out of it, and just how to, get rid of all of the byproduct of our woodworking that we're constantly creating in the shop. Then I've mentioned this a few times, but I'm excited about it, so I'm going to mention it again. When we get to the Thursday Q&A live stream for April, it's not the second Thursday of the month. It's later. It's April 25th. And the reason for that is that date is so that Rob Johnstone, formerly with Woodworkers Journal, good friend of mine, he's going to be in the shop with me helping answer questions. Rob is a good hand tool guy. He's a musical instrument guy. He knows a lot of stuff, and he's got a lot of years in the industry. So you don't want to miss that one. He's a really, really good resource, and you want to make sure you take advantage of the fact that he's going to be here. Oh, and Mike says, on April 25th, who's going to be the straight man, you or Rob? That shall be, and he says, by the way, I enjoy your sense of humor and Rob's. Yeah, that's going to be a toss-up, because I would say if Rob and I were competing for the tongue-in-cheek humor championship, we would be neck and neck for first place. Dave says, can a 1/4-inch MDF panel be glued into a 1x3 poplar frame large? Well, I don't know, like, the source, like what the cornerstone of that question is. Yes, MDF or plywood, like anything man-made, can be glued rather than having to allow it to float because it doesn't move. So if it's something like a door with, in the MDF or the plywood or whatever is the panel of the door, you could glue that in to get that structure out of it, where you can't do that with solid wood. So if that's what you mean, then yes. Dennis asks, on live edge stuff, what can you spray or brush on to help prevent the live edge falling off? Epoxy? So I think the bark maybe is what he means, to prevent the bark from falling off. So in my experience, and I'm not a professional woodsman, the bark is either going to stay on or it's not going to stay on. So like in this chunk of wood, which by the way, I see no one has responded and made a guess as to what they think the material is. Oh, Mark is asking. I'll tell you in a second. On this chunk of wood, the bark is looking pretty iffy. For me, if it looks iffy now, I'm just going to take it off. So usually my test is pretty simple. I'm going to grab the bark and give it a couple of good that. And if with my hand pressure that's peeling like that, then I'm just going to take it off. If I do this and it's rigidly on there, it's staying stuck, then I feel I can leave it. So I guess the answer to the question is I don't know, because I've not done anything to like force the bark to stay on. It's either with nature staying on the material naturally, or it's not, in which case it comes off and you still have a live edge. You just don't have a barked edge. And I've done that, like I've got a lot of live edge furniture out there where years ago the bark was on, I just left it on and then finished over the top, not with an epoxy, but just with my normal water-based finish that I spray on furniture, and the bark is still on there today. So I think, I don't know a lot about it, but I think part of it is when the tree was harvested. My little bit of understanding is that if the tree is harvested in the spring when the sap is flowing, the bark is more likely to fall off. If it's harvested later in the year, the bark is more likely to stay on. But don't use that as your answer for $1,000 on Jeopardy, because I'm not 100% sure on that. This flavor of wood, this slab is hackberry. And I hadn't used it until the first time was a few years ago, and I really fell in love with it. It has got a lot of character. A lot of things go in here. This particular piece has got some compression wood in it. The heartwood sapwood contrast is really, really cool. Not every slab that I've used, I'm just trying to see if the other one is accessible. Don't sweat the cracks. That's just idiosyncratic to this particular piece. I've had other pieces like this that are not cracked out like this. That's just, this one had a lot of internal stress going on. That's what made that happen. But anyway, it's hackberry and it's crazy pretty. You get a coat of finish on there, and it's just really neat how all the different colors and everything pop. Oh, Dennis got the hackberry. Nice. Good job. All right. Well, I'm going to look one more time, see where we're at. Yeah, so I guess we're there. Well, then, that being the case, thanks so much for watching. In addition to these 4 o'clock lives, watch for the 11 o'clock lives. They're every other week. And in those, I'm always doing some kind of a technique or maybe a small project or something. Come April 18th, the 11 o'clock live, watch for a Mother's Day project, give you some ideas there. I'm developing that one as we speak. It's going to be pretty cool. I know what I'm doing, or I know what I'm going to do. It's going to be a pretty cool Mother's Day project. So that'll be done live April 18th at 11 in the morning. Other than that, I will see you when I look at you. Don't forget about Rob being here on the 25th.